The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years, and during all that time, the member species had lived in peace. There were 47 different alien races in the Council, and not one of them understood what war truly meant anymore. Violence was something from their ancient past, something they had evolved beyond millions of years ago. When the first radio signals from Earth reached the edge of Council space, the aliens were excited. A new species meant new ideas, new culture, new friends. They sent a message back immediately, welcoming humanity to join them among the stars. Vincent Hayes was chosen to represent Earth at the Council station. He was a diplomat who had spent his entire career building bridges between different nations on Earth. He believed deeply that any problem could be solved through conversation and understanding. Vincent spent 6 months learning everything he could about the Council species. He learned their languages, their customs, their histories. He wanted to make a good impression. He wanted humanity to be welcomed as equals in this grand galactic community. The day finally came when Vincent stood in the massive council chamber, surrounded by beings that looked nothing like him. Some had scales, some had tentacles, some were made of living crystal. But Vincent was not afraid. He smiled and spoke the words he had practiced 1,000 times. The speech went perfectly. Vincent talked about humanity's journey from a divided world to a united planet. He spoke about Earth's art, music, science, and philosophy. He promised that humans wanted only friendship and cooperation. The aliens listened and hummed their approval, a sound like singing bowls that filled the chamber. Vincent felt proud. This was the beginning of something beautiful. Humanity would finally have a place among the peaceful species of the galaxy. Everything was going according to plan. Then the Krayler arrived without warning. Their ships tore holes in space itself, emerging from faster-than-light travel, right at the edge of the system. The Krayler vessels were black and angular, covered in weapons that the Council species did not even have names for. There were over 200 ships in the fleet, and they moved with military precision toward the Council station. The first ship they encountered was a trade vessel from Vexia, carrying food and medicine to a colony world. The Krayler destroyed it in seconds. One moment the ship was there, and the next moment there was only debris and radiation. The second ship to die was a Council patrol craft. It did not even have weapons, just sensors and communication equipment. The Krayler cut it in half with a beam of purple energy. Panic spread through the Council station faster than the attacking ships could move. Aliens who had never experienced violence did not know what to do. Some stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Others ran in circles trying to find someone who could explain why this was happening. Vincent grabbed the nearest council member, a being named Thal who looked like a walking tree made of blue crystal. Thal's 3 eyes were wide with fear and confusion. He kept saying he did not understand. Why would anyone attack without provocation? Why would anyone kill for no reason? Vincent realized in that moment that these peaceful aliens had no framework for understanding aggression. They had committees for everything, protocols for every situation, but nothing in their experience prepared them for an enemy that simply wanted to destroy them. The Krayler commander broadcast a message across all frequencies. His voice was cold and mechanical. He gave the Council 3 days to surrender, or every world in their territory would be burned to ash. The Council members immediately formed an emergency session to discuss diplomatic options. Vincent listened to them debate for 10 minutes before he could not take it anymore. While the aliens discussed forming a committee to study the Krayler demands, Vincent left the chamber and made a private call back to Earth. The signal took several minutes to reach home, bouncing through the relay stations humanity had built. When the call connected, Admiral George Pierce appeared on the screen. George was a military man who had fought in 3 Earth conflicts before humanity reached the stars. His gray hair and weathered face showed the weight of command. Vincent did not waste time with pleasantries. The words came out rushed and desperate. Vincent explained everything. The Krayler attack, the destroyed ships, the ultimatum. He told George that the Council had no military, no weapons, no way to fight back. The aliens were debating diplomatic solutions while people died. George listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Vincent finished, there was a long pause. Then George asked a simple question. Did Vincent want him to send the fleet? Vincent closed his eyes and thought about everything humanity had hoped to leave behind. War, violence, death. They had come to the stars wanting to be explorers and scientists. But the galaxy had other plans. Vincent opened his eyes and looked directly at the Admiral. He said yes. Send everything. George nodded slowly and the transmission ended. Vincent sat alone in the empty room for a long time after that. He wondered if he had just made humanity's greatest mistake or its finest hour. Outside the window, he could see Kraylor ships moving into position around the station. They were not hurrying. They knew the Council had no way to resist. They had all the time in the world to position their forces for maximum destruction. The aliens probably thought surrender was inevitable. After all, every species they had ever encountered had eventually given up rather than face annihilation. But the Kraylor had never encountered humans before. They did not know that humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting itself. They did not understand that every human alive was descended from survivors of countless wars, famines, disasters, and struggles. Earth had not been a peaceful paradise where species evolved in harmony. It had been a crucible that forged something the Kraylor had never seen before. A species that understood violence not as an aberration but as a tool. Humans knew that sometimes peace could only be preserved through strength. Sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to show it something more dangerous than itself. Vincent returned to the council chamber, where the aliens were still debating. They had formed 3 subcommittees and were discussing whether to send a strongly worded message to the Kraylor. Thal saw Vincent enter and asked if he had any suggestions. Vincent looked at the peaceful beings around him and felt a strange mixture of pity and determination. These aliens had built something beautiful, a society based on mutual respect and cooperation. They had proven that different species could coexist without conflict. But beauty needed protection, and these gentle beings had no idea how to provide it. Vincent told them help was coming. When Thal asked what kind of help, Vincent simply said to watch the sensors. The human fleet would arrive in less than 2 days. Until then, they just needed to survive. The Kraylor did not know it yet, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had attacked the one species in the galaxy that remembered how to fight back. The human warship Valkyrie emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Council system, exactly 47 hours after Vincent's call to Earth. Behind it came 49 more ships, each one bristling with weapons that made the Council observers gasp in shock. The human fleet spread out in a defensive formation that looked like a metal web stretched across space. Every ship knew exactly where to go, moving with a precision that spoke of countless hours of training and preparation. The Council had never seen anything like it. Their own ships drifted peacefully through space, following whatever course seemed most efficient. But the human vessels moved like a school of predatory fish, each one aware of all the others, ready to strike as a unified force. Captain Lisa. Morgan commanded the Valkyrie from a bridge that glowed with tactical displays and targeting computers. She was 34 years old with blonde hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. Lisa had joined Earth's Navy at 18 and had seen combat in the resource wars before humanity left the planet. She knew what the Council did not. That peace was a luxury you could only afford when you had the strength to defend it. Her crew was young but well-trained. Every person on the bridge had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come home. They had watched the footage of the Kraylor destroying defenseless Council ships, and every single one of them had felt anger rise in their chest. Some things were worth fighting for, and protecting those who could not protect themselves was at the top of that list. Lisa studied the tactical display showing the Kraylor fleet position. 207 ships arranged in a standard assault formation, waiting for the Council's surrender deadline to expire. The Kraylor had no idea the human fleet had arrived. Their sensors were focused on the Council station, watching for any attempt to evacuate or flee. They were predators focused on wounded prey, and they had made the mistake of ignoring their surroundings. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. That was their first mistake, and it would be their last. She opened a channel to all 50 human ships, and her voice was calm and steady as she gave the orders that would change galactic history forever. The human fleet powered up their weapons systems all at once. Railguns charged, missile tubes loaded, laser batteries came online, and point defense systems activated. The sudden spike of energy signatures lit up every sensor in the system like a small sun-going nova. On the Kraylor flagship, alarms started blaring as the tactical officer suddenly noticed 50 new contacts that had not been there moments before. The Kraylor commander stared at his displays in confusion, then dismissed the threat with a laugh. 50 ships against 200 was suicide. Whatever species had arrived to help the Council was about to learn a painful lesson about military power. The Kralor had conquered 17 different civilizations using these same tactics and this same fleet. They were undefeated and unstoppable. The Kralor fleet turned toward the human ships and began advancing in their standard attack formation. It was a pattern they had perfected over centuries of warfare, designed to overwhelm enemy defenses through concentrated fire from multiple angles. Every Kralor captain knew their role and executed it with mechanical precision. They had done this so many times before that victory seemed inevitable. The distance between the two fleets shrank rapidly as the Kralor accelerated to attack speed. On the Valkyrie, Lieutenant Jack Barnes tracked the enemy ships with his targeting computer. He was the youngest weapons officer in the human fleet at just 26 years old, but his hands were steady and his aim was perfect. When the Kralor fleet crossed into optimal firing range, Jack had solutions locked on 17 different targets. Lisa waited until the Kralor were committed to their attack pattern before giving the order. Fire. The void between stars erupted in violence, unlike anything the galaxy had seen in thousands of years. Railguns launched tungsten rods at incredible velocities, each projectile carrying more kinetic energy than a small nuclear weapon. The Kralor shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, and they did nothing against solid metal, moving at relativistic speeds. The first Kralor cruiser took 3 railgun hits in rapid succession and simply came apart, its hull shattering like glass. Missiles streaked across the darkness in swarms of hundreds, each one equipped with guidance systems that could track a target through evasive maneuvers and shield fluctuations. The Kralor point defense tried to shoot them down, but there were too many coming from too many angles. Explosions blossomed across the Kralor formation like deadly flowers. Laser batteries added their own contribution to the chaos, invisible beams of concentrated light that burned through armor and cooked internal systems. The human ships did not stay still like the Council vessels had. They broke formation and scattered, each one moving independently while remaining coordinated through their tactical network. They attacked from above and below, from the flanks and rear, never giving the Kralor a stable target to focus on. It was organized chaos, a carefully choreographed dance of destruction that the Kralor had no counter for. Within the first minute of combat, 8 Kralor ships were destroyed. Within 3 minutes, the number climbed to 20. The Kralor formation began to break apart as captains desperately tried to adapt to this new style of warfare. On the Kralor flagship, the commander watched his fleet being torn apart with growing horror. His tactical officer was shouting reports that made no sense. Human weapons were too powerful, human ships were too fast, human tactics were too aggressive. This was not how civilized species fought wars. This was butchery on an industrial scale. The commander tried to rally his forces, ordering them to reform and concentrate fire on individual human ships. But every time his captains tried to focus on one target, that ship would dart away while 2 others attacked from different angles. It was like trying to fight smoke. The Kralor had always relied on their superior numbers and disciplined formations to overwhelm enemies. But numbers meant nothing when you could not hit your target, and formations were useless when the enemy refused to fight in a predictable manner. Lisa watched the battle unfold with clinical precision. She noted which Kralor ships were trying to retreat and marked them as priority targets. An enemy that escaped today would return tomorrow, and she was not going to let that happen. The Valkyrie's railgun spoke again, catching a Kralor destroyer as it tried to turn away. The ship's reactor went critical, and the resulting explosion took 2 nearby vessels with it. All across the battlefield, human ships pressed their advantage. They had trained for years to fight in exactly this kind of engagement. Every captain knew their role. Every crew had practiced these maneuvers until they could execute them in their sleep. The Kralor were learning a harsh lesson that humanity had learned long ago. War was not about honor or fair fights. War was about destroying your enemy's ability to harm you before they could do the same to you. The Council station watched the battle on their sensors in stunned silence. Thol stood beside Vincent Hayes, his crystalline form refracting the display lights into rainbow patterns. He could not comprehend what he was seeing. The humans were winning. Against superior numbers, against a fleet that had conquered dozens of worlds, the humans were winning. Vincent did not look happy about it. His face was grim as he watched ships die on both sides. He knew each of those human vessels had a crew of hundreds, people with families and dreams and hopes for the future. But he also knew this battle was necessary. The Krayler would not stop unless they were stopped. Sometimes the only way to save lives was to take them first. After 18 minutes of combat, the Krayler fleet was reduced to 140 ships, and they were no longer advancing. The Krayler commander knew he was losing, and that knowledge burned in his mind like acid. His fleet had been cut down from 200 ships to 140 in less than 20 minutes. Every tactical doctrine he knew said this was impossible. Superior numbers always won. Disciplined formations always prevailed. And yet his forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy half his size. He made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. He ordered his boarding teams to take the council station directly. If they controlled the station, they could force the humans to negotiate. The Krayler were experts at ground combat. Their warriors stood 3 meters tall, wore armor that could withstand most weapons, and carried plasma rifles that could melt through steel bulkheads. Surely they would fare better in close quarters than they had in open space. Colonel Marcus Webb was already waiting for them. He commanded 500 human Marines who had been secretly deployed to Haven Station the moment the Krayler first appeared. Marcus was 42 years old, a career soldier who had fought in more battles than he cared to remember. His face was scarred and his hair was starting to gray, but his eyes were sharp and his mind was sharper. He had studied the Krayler during the space battle, watching how they moved and fought. He knew their tactics relied on overwhelming force and intimidation. What they did not know was that humans had been fighting each other in close quarters for thousands of years. The Marines had spent 6 hours preparing defensive positions throughout the station's main docking bay. They had set up interlocking fields of fire, placed mines at choke points, and prepared fallback positions if the first line was breached. Sergeant Kelly Price crouched behind a reinforced barricade with her rifle aimed at the sealed blast doors. She was 30 years old with red hair tied back in a braid and hands that were steady, despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Kelly had grown up in Chicago and joined the Marines to escape poverty. She had found something more valuable than money, though. She had found a family, a purpose, and a reason to fight. The 15 Marines with her were quiet and focused. Some checked their weapons one last time. Others whispered prayers or good luck charms. They all knew what was coming. The Krayler were monsters in personal combat, and the Marines were about to face them head-on. But fear was just another enemy to overcome, and these Marines had overcome worse. Marcus watched the sensor display that showed Krayler boarding craft approaching the docking bay. 6 heavy transports, each one carrying at least 50 warriors. The Krayler were not trying to be subtle. They planned to smash through the doors and overwhelm any resistance through sheer numbers and firepower. Marcus smiled coldly. Let them come. He opened a channel to all Marine positions, and his voice was calm and steady. He reminded them of their training, their preparation, their purpose. They were here to protect beings who could not protect themselves. They were here to show the galaxy that humanity stood for something. They were here to win. The blast doors suddenly buckled inward as Krayler plasma torches began cutting through the reinforced metal. Sparks flew and metal glowed red, then white, then melted away completely. The Krayler warriors poured through the breach like a flood of armored death. They moved in perfect formation, shields overlapping, weapons ready. Their plasma rifles powered up with a distinctive whine that echoed through the docking bay. The first wave was 50 strong, advancing toward where they expected to find frightened council civilians. Instead, they found prepared Marines who had been waiting for this exact moment. Marcus let the Krayler advance into the kill zone. He waited until they were fully committed, until more warriors were pouring through behind them. Then he gave the order that Kelly had been waiting to hear. Fire. The docking bay erupted in a storm of gunfire that would have been impossible to survive without cover. The Marines used weapons that fired depleted uranium, rounds at velocities that turned the bullets into armor-piercing death. The Krayler shields were designed to deflect energy weapons but did nothing against solid metal moving faster than sound. The first line of warriors went down like puppets with cut strings. The second line managed to raise their weapons before they too were shredded by the concentrated fire. The third line tried to retreat back through the doors, but they were packed too tightly. Too many warriors trying to squeeze through too small an opening. The Kraylor had brought overwhelming force, but it meant nothing when they were bottlenecked in a confined space. Kelly fired controlled bursts, each one taking down a Kraylor warrior. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she held it steady, aiming for weak points in their armor, neck joints, hip joints, anywhere the plates overlapped. The other Marines did the same, working as a coordinated team. The Kraylor commander watched the assault through his warriors' helmet cameras and felt something cold settle in his chest. His elite troops, veterans of 100 battles, were being massacred. They could not advance against that withering fire, and they could not retreat because more warriors kept pushing forward from behind. It was a nightmare compressed into seconds of real time. He ordered the retreat, but by then it was too late. Marcus had anticipated this moment. He triggered the claymore mines his Marines had placed around the breach point. The explosions were deafening in the enclosed space, turning metal walls into shrapnel that cut down friend and foe alike. When the smoke cleared, there were no more Kraylor warriors standing in the docking bay. Marcus surveyed the carnage with no satisfaction, only grim necessity. This was what war looked like up close. Not the clean explosions visible from space, but the messy reality of bodies and blood and smoke. The Kraylor commander stared at the blank screens where his assault teams had been moments before. All dead. Every single warrior lost in less than 5 minutes. His science officer had been analyzing the humans throughout the battle, and now spoke up with a trembling voice. The officer said he finally understood what made humanity so dangerous. Every other species in the Council had evolved on peaceful worlds where cooperation was rewarded and aggression was punished. They had left violence behind millions of years ago, but humans came from a world where violence was constant, where every species competed with every other species, where even humans fought each other in endless cycles of war. They had not evolved past violence. They had evolved to master it. They had turned killing into a science and war into an art form. The commander felt true fear for the first time in his life. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Lisa Morgan tracked the Kraylor flagship with her targeting computers. The enemy command ship was massive, easily 5 times the size of her vessel. Its shields were still holding despite the damage her fleet had inflicted. She knew that as long as the flagship survived, the Kraylor would keep fighting. Cut off the head and the body would die. She opened a channel to the destroyers Phoenix, Mercury, and Neptune. 3 captains appeared on her screen, each one knowing what she was about to ask. The flagship shields were too strong for conventional weapons. They needed a different approach. Captain Richard Cole of the Phoenix was the first to volunteer. He was 51 years old, close to retirement, and he had a daughter back on Earth who was about to graduate from university. Richard had served in the Navy for 30 years, and he knew his duty. Lisa wanted to refuse, but she could not afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. The mission came first. The Council species came first. Humanity's word came first. She gave Richard permission and watched as the Phoenix broke formation along with Mercury and Neptune. The 3 destroyers accelerated toward the Kraylor flagship, their weapons blazing a path through the defending ships. The Kraylor tried to intercept them, but the rest of the human fleet pressed the attack, giving them no time to coordinate a proper defense. Richard pushed his ship's reactor beyond safe limits, squeezing every ounce of speed from the Phoenix. His crew had already evacuated in escape pods per his orders. He was alone on the bridge now, just him and his ship making one final run. The Kraylor flagship tried to turn away, but it was too massive to maneuver quickly. Richard lined up his approach vector and locked it in. The Phoenix would strike the flagship amidships where the shields were weakest. The impact at this velocity would release more energy than a small nuclear weapon. Both ships would die, but the Kraylor fleet would lose its command structure. Richard thought about his daughter one last time, hoped she would understand why he had to do this, then pushed the throttle to maximum. The Phoenix became a spear of light crossing the void. The Kraylor flagship's point defense fired desperately, but it was too little too late. The destroyer struck home with the force of a meteor impact, and both ships vanished in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. When the light faded, there was only debris where 2 ships had been. The Kraylor fleet, leaderless and demoralized, began to scatter in all directions. The Kraylor fleet scattered like leaves in a storm, their ships breaking formation and fleeing in every direction toward the edge of the system. They left behind their damaged vessels, their supply ships, their wounded warriors. The human fleet did not pursue them. Lisa Morgan gave the order to stand down and secure the area. There would be no hunting down fleeing enemies, no revenge attacks, no unnecessary killing. The battle was won, and that was enough. Her crews began recovery operations, searching for survivors from both sides and tending to the wounded. It was a lesson the Kraler had not expected. Humans knew how to show mercy even in the midst of war. They understood that today's enemy might become tomorrow's ally if given the chance. The council station slowly came back to life as the immediate danger passed. Admiral George Pierce arrived at Haven Station 3 days later, aboard the massive carrier Endeavour. He was 60 years old, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many battles and too many losses. George had commanded Earth's Pacific Fleet before humanity reached the stars, and he had hoped to never see combat again. But the galaxy had other plans, and he had answered the call because that was what soldiers did. They served when they were needed regardless of personal preference. He requested an immediate meeting with the full Galactic Council, and they assembled in their grand chamber within hours. George stood before them in his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, each one a story of sacrifice and survival. The council members looked at him with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and confusion. Thal spoke first because he had known Vincent Hayes the longest and considered humans to be friends despite everything. His voice trembled as he thanked George for saving them. The council had watched the battle, and they understood now that without human intervention, they would all be dead or enslaved. But Thal also admitted he did not understand how humans could be so effective at violence. The council had spent thousands of years studying war as a historical curiosity, something primitive species did before they evolved. They had assumed violence was a phase that intelligent beings grew out of naturally. Humanity challenged that assumption in the most dramatic way possible. George listened quietly until Thal finished speaking. Then he took a deep breath and began to explain something the council had never considered. Before, he told them about Earth's history, in simple terms that even species without a concept of warfare could understand. Humanity's homeworld had not been a paradise where evolution proceeded peacefully. Earth was a planet of competition where every species fought for survival against predators, disease, starvation, and environmental disasters. Humans had not been the strongest or fastest or most dangerous creatures on their world. They had survived through intelligence, cooperation, and the willingness to fight when fighting was necessary. For thousands of years, humans had battled each other over resources, territory, ideology, and simple misunderstandings. They had developed weapons of incredible destructive power and learned tactics that made warfare into a science. Not because they enjoyed violence, but because survival demanded it. Every human alive was descended from ancestors who had survived countless conflicts, and that legacy was written into their very culture. George paused and looked at each council member in turn. He told them that humanity had hoped to leave that violent past behind when they reached the stars. They had dreamed of becoming explorers and scientists, of joining a peaceful galactic community and learning from older, wiser species. For a brief time it seemed that dream might come true, but then the Kraler attacked and humanity realized the universe was not as peaceful as the council believed. There were still predators out there, still species that took what they wanted by force, still threats that could not be reasoned with or negotiated away. Someone had to stand against those threats, and the council species could not do it because they had forgotten how. So humanity had stepped forward not because they wanted to fight, but because they were the only ones who could. A delegate from the Auroran Collective asked the question that everyone was thinking. She wanted to know if humans would now use their military power to dominate the council the way the Kraler had tried to do. It was a fair concern. Every species in galactic history that had possessed superior weapons had eventually used them to conquer others. Why should humanity be different? George understood the fear behind that question, and he answered it honestly. He told them that humanity had learned hard lessons from their own history. They had seen what happened when military power went unchecked, when soldiers answered to no one but themselves, when might made right. Earth had nearly destroyed itself multiple times before finally learning that true strength came from restraint, not domination. Humanity did not want to rule the galaxy. They wanted to protect it so that peaceful species could continue being peaceful. The council deliberated for 3 full days, while the human fleet maintained position around Haven Station. Arguments were made on all sides. Some species thought humanity was too dangerous to trust with military authority. Others argued that without human protection, They would all eventually fall to the next aggressive species that came along. Still others proposed trying to build their own military forces, so they would not be dependent on anyone. That last suggestion died quickly when tacticians ran simulations, showing it would take centuries to train council species to fight effectively. The Kraylor or someone like them would return long before then. In the end, the vote was unanimous, though some delegates clearly had reservations. The Galactic Council would remain a peaceful organization, dedicated to diplomacy, science, and mutual cooperation. But they would accept humanity's offer of military protection. Humans would become the Council's defenders, their shield against the darkness between stars. Vincent Hayes stood beside George when the Council announced their decision. Vincent felt conflicted about the outcome. Part of him was proud that humanity would protect innocent species. Part of him mourned the dream of leaving violence behind forever. George placed a hand on Vincent's shoulder and told him something that helped ease the burden. He said that humanity was not becoming monsters by taking on this role. They were preventing monsters from winning. There was a difference between aggression and defense, between conquest and protection. As long as humanity remembered that difference, they could be trusted with the responsibility they were accepting. The Council immediately began working with human military advisors to establish formal defense structures. Haven Station would become the headquarters for a new organization called the Council Defense Fleet. Lisa Morgan was promoted to admiral and given command of the entire operation. Her first priority was establishing training facilities where humans could teach willing volunteers from Council species how to defend themselves. Not every species would participate, but some were already expressing interest. The Auroran Collective wanted to learn how to protect their crystal cities. The Vexians wanted to defend their trade routes. The Centauri wanted to ensure their colony worlds would never be attacked again. Major Kelly Price was chosen to lead the new training academy. She stood before her first class of 40 students from 20 different species and looked at their eager, frightened faces. Some had tentacles instead of arms, some had compound eyes, some breathed methane instead of oxygen. But they all shared one thing in common. They wanted to learn how to stand up for themselves and their people. Kelly told them something that would become the Academy's unofficial motto for generations to come. She said that peace was not simply the absence of conflict. Anyone could have peace if they were willing to surrender everything and accept whatever fate others chose for them. True peace was what you built when you had the strength to defend your values, your people, your way of life. That kind of peace required courage, training, and the willingness to fight when fighting was the only option left. The students listened carefully, absorbing this new perspective. For species that had never known violence, these concepts were revolutionary, but they were also necessary if the Council was going to survive in a galaxy that was not as peaceful as they had believed. George prepared to return to Earth and report to the civilian government about what had happened. Before he left, he met one final time with Vincent. The two men stood in an observation lounge looking out at the human fleet that now orbited Haven Station permanently. Vincent asked if George thought they had made the right choice. George was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said he did not know if it was right, but it was necessary. The galaxy needed defenders, and humanity was willing to fill that role. Maybe someday in the distant future, when the predatory species were gone or reformed, humans could finally set down their weapons. Until then, they would stand guard so others could sleep safely. Vincent nodded slowly and accepted that answer because he knew it was the truth. 6 months passed since the Battle of Haven Station, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. News of humanity's victory spread faster than light itself, carried by traders and diplomats to every corner of known space. Species that had never heard of Earth suddenly knew the name of the planet that had produced warriors capable of defeating the Kraylor. The story grew with each retelling until humans became almost mythical figures, beings who could appear from nowhere and destroy fleets 10 times their size. Some of the stories were exaggerated, but the core truth remained. Humanity had done what no other council species could do. They had fought back and won. The Kraylor themselves retreated to their home territory and stayed there, nursing their wounds and their wounded pride. They sent no more fleets toward council space and ignored all attempts at communication. Admiral Lisa Morgan used those 6 months well and transformed the council defense fleet from a desperate improvisation into a proper military force. The fleet now numbered 200 ships, including 70 human vessels, and 130 council ships that had been retrofitted with human weapons and defensive systems. More importantly, Lisa had spent countless hours training the alien crews in human tactics and strategy. It was not easy work because the Council species had no cultural framework for understanding warfare. They had to learn not just how to operate weapons, but why those weapons existed and when to use them. Lisa discovered that each species brought unique advantages to combat that humans lacked. The Auroran Collective could phase their ships through solid matter for short periods, making them nearly impossible to hit. The Vexians had developed shield technology that could redirect incoming energy in unexpected directions. The Centauri built fighters so fast and maneuverable they seemed to bend the laws of physics. When humanity taught these species how to fight, they created something more powerful than any single race could achieve alone. The Council Defense Fleet became a fusion of technologies and tactics that made it formidable enough to give any aggressor pause. Kelly Price watched her students graduate from the academy with a sense of pride mixed with sadness. She had taught them everything she knew about combat, tactics, and survival. Now they would return to their home worlds and teach others, spreading the knowledge of self-defense throughout Council space. Some would never see combat, and she hoped that was true for most of them, but others would face real battles and some would die. That was the price of freedom, and it was a price Kelly understood too well. She had lost friends in every conflict she had ever fought, and each loss left a scar that never fully healed. Then the Kraylor returned with a vengeance that shocked even the most pessimistic human strategists. Their fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Council space with 500 ships, more than twice what they had brought the first time. It was their entire battle fleet. Every warship they possessed gathered for one final assault. The Kraylor commander who led this fleet was not the same one who had fled 6 months earlier. That commander had been executed for his failure. The new leader had studied the human tactics carefully and believed he had found their weakness. Humans relied on mobility and superior firepower, but even they could be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. 500 ships against 200 meant the Kraylor had more than a 2-to-1 advantage. Surely that would be enough to crush these upstart defenders and teach the galaxy a lesson about challenging Kraylor. Superiority. Lisa received the alert while reviewing tactical reports in her office aboard the new flagship Defender. The ship was twice the size of the Valkyrie and bristled with enough weapons to take on a small fleet alone. But even the Defender could not face 500 enemy ships by itself. Lisa called an immediate meeting of all ship captains, both human and alien. They gathered virtually through holographic projections, faces from 24 different species, all looking to her for leadership. She laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The Kraylor outnumbered them badly, and this time they would not make the mistake of underestimating human capabilities. This would be a real battle with real risks, and some of them would not survive. She gave every captain the chance to withdraw if they chose. Not a single one accepted the offer. The Council Defense Fleet met the Kraylor at a location that would be remembered in history as the Second Battle of Haven Station. Lisa had chosen the battlefield carefully, positioning her forces near an asteroid field that would limit the Kraylor's ability to use their numerical advantage. The enemy fleet arrived in perfect formation, confident and aggressive. They had learned from their previous defeat and adapted their tactics accordingly. Instead of advancing in one mass, they split into 3 separate battle groups that would attack from different angles. It was a sound strategy that should have worked against most opponents, but Lisa had anticipated exactly this approach and prepared for it. She divided her own fleet into smaller task forces, each one built around a specific combination of human firepower and alien special abilities. The battle began with a Kraylor bombardment that lit up space with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. The Council ships used their Vexian shields to redirect most of the incoming fire back toward the enemy, creating a deadly mirror effect that the Kraylor had not expected. While the Kraylor reeled from shooting themselves, Auroran ships phased through their formation and struck at vulnerable targets from behind. Human destroyers followed up with railgun barrages that punched through weakened shields. The Centauri fighters swarmed around larger Kraylor vessels like angry insects, too fast to track and too numerous to ignore. Every species in the Council Defense Fleet contributed something unique to the battle, and together they were far more than the sum of their parts. Colonel Marcus Webb led his Marines in defending Haven Station when Kraylor boarding. Parties tried the same tactic that had failed 6 months earlier. This time they faced not just human defenders, but a mixed force that included warriors from 8 different Council species. The Kraylor discovered that other races could also learn to fight effectively, when properly trained and motivated. The battle for the station lasted 6 hours and ended with every Kraylor boarding team either dead or captured. In space, the fleet battle raged for 12 more hours as both sides committed everything they had. Ships died on both sides. Good people sacrificed themselves to protect their comrades, and the void between stars was painted with the light of countless explosions. But slowly, inexorably, the Kraylor fleet was ground down by superior tactics and unbreakable determination. When the battle finally ended, the Kraylor had lost 460 ships. Only 40 survived to limp away toward their home territory, badly damaged and completely defeated. The Council Defense Fleet had lost 38 vessels, each one a tragedy but far fewer than anyone had dared hope. Lisa stood on the bridge of the Defender and watched the last Kraylor ships flee into faster-than-light travel. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion and relief. This battle had proven something important. The Council could defend itself now. With human training and support, the peaceful species of the galaxy had learned to stand up against aggression. The Kraylor sent a message 3 days later through neutral intermediaries. They acknowledged defeat and requested a peace treaty. More importantly, they warned other aggressive species to stay away from Council space, because it was now under the protection of beings who would fight. Back news of the second battle spread even faster than the first, and its impact was profound. Across the galaxy, predatory species reconsidered their plans for expansion. Pirates who had raided Council trade routes found other targets. Slavers who had preyed on peaceful worlds moved to less defended areas. The mere presence of the Council Defense Fleet became a deterrent that prevented conflicts before they could start. This was the goal Lisa had worked toward from the beginning. Not endless war, but the kind of peace that came from being too dangerous to attack. Over the following years, humanity's role in the galaxy continued to evolve. They trained more Council species in self-defense, established patrol routes that protected trade lanes, and responded to calls for help from worlds under threat. But they never conquered, never ruled, never demanded tribute or submission. They remained true to the promise George Pierce had made. Humanity would be the shield that protected the innocent, nothing more and nothing less. Vincent Hayes stood in the Council chamber 10 years after that first desperate battle. His hair was completely gray now, and his face showed the weight of a decade spent balancing human military power with Council civilian authority. But his belief in peace had never wavered, even as he learned to accept that sometimes peace required strength. He addressed the assembled delegates and spoke about the future he envisioned. A galaxy where warfare became obsolete, not because species forgot how to fight, but because they chose not to. Where the Council Defense Fleet existed as a promise and a warning, rather than an active force. Where humanity could finally set down their weapons and become the explorers and dreamers they had always wanted to be. It was a beautiful vision, and Vincent believed it was possible, though perhaps not in his lifetime. Lisa Morgan retired from active command and became the head of the Strategic Defense.